Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today's video will be a tutorial on Darth Maul's choke ability. We'll be looking into some of the techniques and strategies you can use to land the choke, some deadly punishes and combos you can use if you do land the choke, as well as going into depth on some base stats and star cards for this ability. This video will kind of be split into three parts. First we'll just be looking at some base stats and basics of the choke ability, and then we'll be looking at how to land the ability. By that I mean how you can actually get your opponent caught in the ability before looking at the punishes. Starting off with some base stats, when you use the choke ability you'll get an animation that's about 1.5 seconds long. Then any enemy within 15 meters in front of you will get briefly choked before being thrown away. The ability does 77 damage and without star cards has a cooldown of 18 seconds. Speaking of star cards, it's most beneficial not to run any of the choke cards, especially when dueling. Most of these cards either make the ability worse or just don't give it any effect at all. You're better off running the following cards that I'm showing on the screen because they all have much better benefits and are much better cards to run in duels. One last thing that's important to mention is that when you use the choke ability you can't block and you can take a lot of damage if you're not careful. Obi-Wan and Rey specifically can deal a lot of damage to Maul if he misses his choke, so make sure to be careful. There is however a type of countermeasure that you can use if you do miss the choke, and that is by throwing your saber throw at your enemy and then dodging backwards. This way you can get 1 or 2 saber throw hits if your enemy tries to get some hits when you use the choke, and while this doesn't guarantee you won't get hit, it makes it so that you will deal some damage back to your opponent. Next we'll be looking into how to land the choke ability. In this part of the video we'll be looking into strategies and techniques you can use to get your enemies caught in the choke. For example, the unblockable choke is a very effective method because it guarantees you'll land the choke if you time it correctly. To do the unblockable choke, you need to combo your saber throw with your chokehold ability by throwing your saber throw at your enemy and then timing it so that you press choke immediately when the enemy gets hit in the back with the saber throw. The stagger the enemy gets from being hit with the saber throw will make it so that they can't block the choke. This move is super useful because once you get the timing down, it's a pretty much guaranteed that if they get hit with the saber throw, you'll get them in the choke and then you can move in for some punishes. The unblockable choke can also be comboed into the next technique we'll be looking at, which is the frame trap. Now, in this part of the video we won't be looking at the advanced combos you can do with the frame trap, but more the beginning part when you get staggered out of your choke animation and that allows you to do the frame trap. If you're confused about what I'm saying, then watch the gameplay carefully. When I use the choke, I get hit by a saber hit before my enemy registers in the choke, and then I quickly swing to force an air recovery and follow up for a jump attack. All you need to know at this point in the video is that if you get hit while in the choke animation, you'll get this stagger animation which indicates that you've been knocked out of the animation and you're free to go for punish hits, which we'll talk about later. The frame trap is incredibly useful against enemies that like to parry because you can trick them into falling for the frame trap when they're going for a parry. Also, you can frame trap off abilities, although the timing is much more precise and instead of being hit by the ability you actually have to block it while in the choke. If you are going for a frame trap, make sure that your block animation doesn't cancel your choke. If you block at the exact same time as pressing the choke animation, then you'll hear the soundtrack for the choke, but nothing will happen and you'll have to wait for the ability to cool down. Our last strategy to land the choke is to find openings. By this I mean any time that you have the opportunity to land the choke when they're not blocking or when you can get the choke behind their block. Some examples could include after you've been knocked down, after a hook swing, by reading your enemy's dodge pattern, or especially when your enemy's low stamina. This one works pretty consistently. If you find an opening in a duel to use the choke ability, unless you're on low health you should always go for it, because if you're quick enough most of the time you'll land it. And even if you don't, remember that you can use a saber throw as a countermeasure to deal some damage if they go for punishes. Next we'll be looking at punishing Maul's choke. We've already looked at landing the ability, but what should you do if you get your enemy in the choke? Well, a technique you'll definitely need to learn is the lunge. The lunge is a great way to cover some ground after using the choke ability when going for punishes. If you didn't know, if you press L3 and swing, right before the choke animation finishes, you can shoot after your enemy and cover a bunch of ground. This is great because you won't have to waste 2 spin attacks, and if you lunge and then spin attack and then lunge again, you can often get 1 or 2 hits. Unfortunately, the lunge will only work if your enemy is in range, and that range isn't that long. It's slightly shorter than the range that you do when you dodge, so if they're any further than that, you won't lock onto them. Although if they are in range, it's always a good idea to lunge because it's the fastest way to close ground. Moving on from lunging, a combo that you'll definitely need to familiarize yourself with is the jump attack into saber throw combo. When you have an opportunity to use this, you should always try to, because you can kill an enemy from half health with it. You only get the chance to use this combo if your enemy hits an obstacle or something, or you get a really good lunge so you have lots of time to set up the combo. But what do you do if you're too far away to lunge and there's no obstacles, or you just don't feel comfortable lunging? Well, there's a very simple method that you can use, and that's just the spin attack twice. This is incredibly easy, but it's also super effective since you cover tons of ground. The only downside is that you do use 2 spin attacks. And before we move into frame trap territory, I do want to mention that your saber throw is definitely a viable option when punishing the choke, and if your enemy's low health or you just want to deal a little amount of damage, you can just jump up or spin attack and then use the saber throw. So now we're going to be looking at some combos you can do off the frame trap. So assuming you've used the choke and then your enemies hit you so you've been knocked out of the animation, what you can do next is up to you, but I'd recommend swinging once just before they get thrown away to force an air recovery. Then you can jump up to meet them and hit them with a jump attack. This damage is actually pretty decent since you're getting 2 hits plus the damage from the choke. If you have your saber throw available, then you can get a nice combo by throwing your saber throw while jumping up and then getting the jump attack. You can actually get 2 saber throw hits off this and it can deal a lot of damage. You guys did see this combo earlier, but it's so satisfying that I want to show it again. You can get 1 hit, 2 saber throw hits, a frame trap, an air recovery, and then a jump attack, and this is 10 damage off of dealing 750 damage. However, you don't actually have to do the swing to force an air recovery. This is just a very common way to deal high damage. If you want, you can just start running, and that way you'll have lots of time to pull off that combo I showed earlier or one of your own. And that's it on this video on Darth Maul's choke ability. If you enjoyed or learned something new about Maul's choke, then make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more Star Wars Battlefront 2 content. Now with that being said, have a great day and I'll see you out on the Battlefront.